Hey guys, it's Mike. So, part two of talking about death. As promised, yeah. Sorry, I didn't like I said last time. I didn't quite mean for this vlog to get quite so heavy, quite so fast. But it is what it is, right? So let's talk about death itself. I'm gonna preface this by saying I'm not getting into religion per se at this particular juncture. Though obviously there is a little bit of overlap in the subject matter, right? So sometimes religion will kind of come into play and influence it. Other times, it's just something I'm not going to get into right now, and we'll get to into it at a later episode, maybe. One of the old jokes says, if you want to keep friends, the two things you don't talk about are politics or religion. So we shall see. What is death, right? I guess is a really interesting place to start. What is death? Why do we die? There's a few possible ways to go here. There's the genetic route, right? Human beings, obviously, we've got the double helix DNA, which is strand, and from my understanding, which I'm not a geneticist, keep that in mind, of course. But from my understanding, over time, as we live, um, as we experience life, the ends of our DNA begin to fray like a shoelace, right? And as time progresses and the ends fray more and more, they get weaker, and eventually, at a certain point, they're so weak that they can't realistically sustain any longer, right? That's why clones typically have shorter lifespans, at least in cloning as we know it right now. Because when you clone, like when they cloned Dolly the sheep, for example, it was using partly frayed DNA, right? The DNA had already frayed because the original sheep, well, sorry, shaking the camera, because the original sheep had lived life and the ends of the sheep's DNA had frayed, and so you're starting in a pre-frayed state. So you basically are missing out on those earlier years of genetic life, as it were. So, from a biological perspective, it makes a certain amount of sense that over time, the body just wears out. And as awesome as the human body is at regenerating itself, there's a limit. There always is, right? So there's that. There's also more metaphysical ways of looking at it, like the spiritual or philosophical approaches. So let's look at those. Say, for example, well, an interesting thought there is the soul in and of itself. I do believe that there's something beyond the physical that imparts life, right? Um, I don't, there's got to be something now. Whether it's something that we just simply haven't found the explanation for yet, or whether it is something like a soul, I honestly don't know. I'd like to think it's soul related, but maybe part of that is just not wanting to let go. People don't like to let go. People die and leave us, and we don't like to think of them as gone. If it's hard for us as the survivors to think of them as gone. Um, I do think that's why something like this is so prevalent in our society. I think it is a coping mechanism for survivors, for it to be so prominent, so prevalent. I mean, for example, um, I mean, recognizing that this might change in time or when situations, you know, as living arrangements and knowledge changes over time, I've always said that when I die, do whatever makes the people I leave behind comfortable or happiest, right? I'm not going to care. I'm dead. If the people who I'm leaving behind want to cremate me or want to not cremate me or want to donate my body to science, I don't. I'm going to be dead. It's not up to me. I think it's up to the people who I'm leaving behind and have to deal with it. I think they should be the ones that make whatever decision makes them happiest and helps them deal with it best. Who that is, I have no idea yet. Um, because family that I have, the only one that I like, the only one that would be expected would be my brother, who being younger than I am. I hope to all hell that it's not my mom or my grandparents at that. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know who's going to be the one making that decision, but I hope they choose whatever suits them, whatever makes them happiest, whatever makes them most comfortable. So, on that note, um, what about the people who have left me behind? Whom? Who? I can never remember which one is proper in which circumstances. What about the people who have left me behind? I'd like to think that there is some sort of persistence for them. I'd like to think that my dad has some sort of awareness or knowledge. I'd like to think whether it be a real time he's watching over me or whether it be a now that he has left the physical form, he now has an understanding of why I did what I did. Not referring to something anything specific, but like why I do what I do, how I think, what the motivate. Like I'd like to think that now that he's beyond the physical, he has an understanding that transcends physicality. That he has an insight into, you know, my mom, my brother, my mind that he couldn't have had had he not passed away. Whether that's the case, I have no idea. I really don't. This is something that has obviously been debated by culture for thousands of years, and there's several common trends. But you know, our understanding, our belief has evolved and never really been very consistent. Even at the same time, there's been several um, mutually exclusive. Like they can, or is that where they're not possible to both be true interpretations, right? Personally, I think it would be absolutely fascinating to see what's on the other side or experience. Um, I think it would be absolutely fascinating from a purely intellectual curiosity perspective, um, because it's the unknown, right? And the unknown is always scary, but also always kind of cool. Um, so I kind of want to know what's there, right? Um, so since I've opened that door, let's go on to the topic of self-perpetuated death, i.e., suicide. People always the wording people always use is "Have you contemplated suicide?" I think that's bad wording. I think that's really bad wording because I think almost everybody has contemplated suicide at some point. Whether anybody has considered actually doing it is a completely different question. And I don't. When people say, "Have you contemplated suicide?" That's what they're asking, but that's that's not the language that they're using. Like, have you contemplated suicide? I think everybody has thought, well, I heard about this person who committed suicide, and what could have driven them to do that, or my friend committed suicide, and this is what I went through, or like for example, what I talked about earlier, like it has been a very curious thought process for me to be, well, what if I committed suicide? What what would be on the other side? Like, what if I died? What would be on the other side of that transition point? How would people react? What would people think? What would people say? I'm actually very curious as to what would be said at my eulogy, at my funeral. I have no intentions on trying to find out. Like I said, I've not actually considered committing suicide myself, but it is a very interesting thought experiment to consider your own death. Like, what does it feel like? What do you go through mentally and physically? What happens afterwards? Because that's something we have no clue about. We don't have the slightest inkling what's expecting us, like what to expect on the other side. I mean, this is where that overlap comes in. We have various religions which tell us various things, and some of those religions can be seen with a little bit of overlap and or as the same thing with different interpretations, but others of them are very different. And people can believe what they want to believe. I don't want to say anybody is right or wrong, but man, is it an interesting thought. What is waiting for us after death? Um, and it is terrifying to have something so uncertain, but really, really intriguing. So, so there's that. um, an idea I had years and years ago, and it's just a fantasy. It's not actual theory or anything like that. Is what if life is a vacation or like a thrill ride for souls or spirits or whatever, right? Like, what if the spirit is our natural state, up in heaven or wherever, right? What if the spirit is our natural state, and every now and again, one of the spirits or one of the souls says, I think I want to live again. And so what they do is they kind of like they check in their memories, they check in their knowledge of how the universe actually is, and then they go down to the physical world. They become physical, and they start with no memories. They start with no prior knowledge, no understanding. They get to experience life all over again, and then when they die, it's just like getting off the ride. You step off the carriage or the car, whatever it is that you want to ride, and you pick your memories up, you pick your knowledge up again. And it's just like you have this higher understanding of the universe, and you're just like, that life was pretty cool. I got married this time. I had 3 kids, a nice house. Yeah, that one was kind of cool. I wonder if next time it's gonna be. I wonder if next time I live, it's gonna be like that, or next time I go back to the physical world, if it's gonna be that comfortable, if it's gonna be more exciting, right? Um, that is a very like wouldn't that be just wild? Like after death, you're just like, oh yeah, that was my third time living. Oh yeah, I remember. You know, now that I'm back off the ride, I remember those other times I was there. Man, that second time sucked, but this third time was kind of awesome, right? wouldn't that be wouldn't that be amazing if that was how things worked? But once again, we don't know, right? I mean, we can't know. Our comprehension, our understanding of the universe doesn't allow for anything like that at this moment, right? We have to go outside of our actual, well, we have to go to a different kind of understanding, right? We have to go to less of a scientific or intellectual understanding and more of a faith and belief understanding or an intuitive. It's really interesting, actually. Really, really curious to think about what is happening. On the other hand, I mean, another possibility is that it's simply that we run out of fuel. I mean, think about, imagine a car, right? I mean, this is obviously isn't the way cars work, but imagine like you build a car. Imagine cars didn't have imagine gas stations didn't exist, right? You buy a car and it's got a tank full of gas, and you drive it and you drive it and you drive it, and it's out of gas. There's no gas stations. There's no gas pump. You're just out of gas. The car dies. Like that's just as possible as anything else that we've got, right? We simply run out of fuel and stop working. And that some people find absolutely terrifying. What if this is all it is? What if there isn't any higher purpose? What if when I die I'm just gone and I don't exist anymore? Talk about existential crises. I mean, people have gone bonkers over less, but I mean, really? I mean, okay, I'm gonna pull out a little bit of an obscure reference here. I mean, it's not really obscure, but Final Fantasy IX. I know Final Fantasy is like one of those super popular game series, but Final Fantasy IX is for some reason one of those games which not a lot of people have played as much as say like 7 or 10 or something like that. But the people who have played it, many of them cite it as one of their favorites, and part of it is because it manages to strike a really, really delicate balance between kind of a more cartoony, more fun style, like reminiscent of classic Final Fantasies, but dealing with some heavy topics, really heavy topics. There's a character Vivi, right? Vivi is a black mage, and as part of the story, you discover that black mages are manufactured. They are a product. That is produced and sold as a weapon of war. Only some of them have started to become sentient. Some of them have started to become self-aware, and they formed the Black Mage Village. And some of them have started to stop, um, and they know that the humans call this death, but they don't really understand it. They just woke up one day in the aftermath of a battlefield, and they were just like, "Hey, wait a minute! I am a thing. I am me. I am aware." And I found others like me, and we started this city. But then some of us stopped moving. And what is this? What is going on? And they're trying to come to terms with what is death. Is it just that we have a limited functional period and after that we just stop? Or like what the hell is going on? And it is so ridiculously profound and heavy subject matter for a game, especially a game that isn't often perceived as like heavy philosophical. Like it is more of a fun, humorous game, and it deals with such incredible things. Like, isn't oh the possibilities of what death means are infinite and at the same time nil. right? We really don't understand death. Um, I think. I think that really, I mean, we know obviously the physical body at some point stops working. And part of it is biological, scientific. Our DNA gets frayed, or um, we sustain injury enough that the human body cannot regenerate anymore, or up to a certain point, and so because it can't regenerate, it stops. But anything beyond that, it's fascinating. I find it absolutely fascinating. I could go on and on. I notice I've already passed 20 minutes again, and I completely did not mean for this to be as long as last week's episode. This might be a trend, especially if I get really enthusiastic about a topic. So yeah, long story short, I believe my thoughts on death are we simply don't know. There's so many possibilities, and some of them are absolutely terrifying, and other ones are kind of neat, and other ones are kind of feel good, and other ones are, life is meaningless, right? But it's one of those, pardon me, it's one of those great what ifs for me, right? Well, what if life is a joyride for our true state of being, and we just return to it after we're done, right? And it feels like a blink of an eye, even though for us it is literally a lifetime at this particular uh, point. So, as you can tell, this is something I could go on and on and on about. I'm going to cut it short there. If you want to talk about this with me, obviously this is something that I think is really cool to just talk about. Like, what about the possibilities? Is there, if there is persistence, what does that look like? Things like that. I think it's a really interesting discussion. And as much as death sucks for the people who are left behind, the people who survive it, and I'm sure in a lot of cases, death kind of hurts like hell when you're actually going through it, and for that reason, kind of sucks. I'm still, and I imagine I will be for the rest of my life, eh, absolutely curious and fascinated by what's going to happen once we cross over that threshold and see what's on the other side. Anyway, talk to you later. Hopefully, next week won't be as heavy. I haven't decided what I'm going to talk about yet. Talk to you later. Bye bye.